Welcome back, Deep Divers. You know how this works, right? We take what seems like just a random snippet of info, and we dig in. We see what's really going on beneath the surface.
It's all about connections, right? You never know where these deep dives will take us.
Exactly. And today we're time travelers. Sort of.
Oh, this sounds interesting. Time travel, where are we going?
Our focus is going to be on a single date, October 23rd. And get this. We're going to see how this one day has played a role in some major world-changing events.
I like it. You know, it really is amazing when you think about it. When you zero in on a single date like that, you see all these historical echoes you might otherwise miss.
You said it. You start to see patterns, get a whole new perspective.
It is kind of like a kaleidoscope. You know, the same pieces can make totally different pictures depending on how you twist it.
Perfect analogy. And speaking of different pieces, our source actually threw down a challenge for this deep dive. The mission. To find 3 really impactful events. The catch. They all have to have happened on October 23rd.
So, no specific events to work with, just the date itself. Okay, I'm game.
Are you ready to see what we dug up?
Yeah, let's do this. And I think you'll find these events, let's just say they're pretty fascinating. We're going to start in the middle of the Cold War. Picture a nation fighting for its freedom. The date, October 23rd, 1956. The place, Budapest, Hungary.
Okay, I'm getting some serious Cold War vibes already. A nation fighting for freedom. Lay it on me.
So on that day, students in Budapest, they started protesting against Soviet rule. It started peacefully enough, but things changed quickly. As the day went on, it exploded. It became a full-blown revolution, the Hungarian Revolution.
Wow, a revolution. What was it about this particular protest that, ignited things? What made it different?
Well, you got to think about the context. Hungary, they were under Soviet control, like a lot of Eastern European countries back then. And people were desperate for freedom, for the chance to decide their own fate.
Right, they wanted to be their own country, make their own choices. Makes sense.
Exactly. And around that same time, some reforms were happening in Poland. So the students in Hungary, they saw that and thought, hey, we can do this too. We've had enough. And their protest, it was like it became a symbol for all that bottled up frustration and that yearning for change.
So it wasn't just about Hungary. It was a part of something bigger. It was about freedom.
Yeah.
For everyone.
Exactly. Yeah. You can see how this event in Hungary, it connected to a much larger movement for freedom across all of Eastern Europe. It shows how powerful the desire for freedom can be, even when things seem impossible.
Yeah, that's a really important point.
And even though, in the end, the Soviet forces crushed the uprising, the Hungarian Revolution still mattered. It had a huge impact.
What kind of impact?
Well, it sent shockwaves through the entire Soviet bloc. I mean, other countries saw what happened in Hungary, and they were emboldened, They started thinking, hey, maybe we can challenge Soviet authority too. And ultimately, that's part of what led to the fall of the Iron Curtain years later.
It's incredible. One event, even if it doesn't succeed right away, can change the course of history. Okay, you've set a high bar here. What other October 23rd event did you find?
All right, fast forward a few decades. It's 1983, same date, October 23rd, but we're a world away. We're in Beirut, Lebanon, in the middle of a really brutal civil war.
The Lebanese Civil War. Yeah, that was a tough one. Lots of different groups fighting, and it dragged on for years.
Absolutely, a really complex and tragic conflict. And on October 23rd, 1983, there was a horrific attack. 2 truck bombs exploded, targeting different buildings that housed American and French peacekeeping troops.
Oh man, I remember hearing about that.
The blasts were just devastating. 241 American service members were killed, and 58 French paratroopers too.
It's hard to fathom that kind of loss. What was the situation in Lebanon like back then? What led to such a volatile environment?
Well, the Lebanese Civil War was a mess. There were so many different factions involved, all fighting for power. And these groups, they had different religions, different political views. It was a tangled web, really.
So a lot of internal divisions, basically.
Exactly. But there were also external forces at play. Other countries getting involved, adding fuel to the fire. The peacekeeping forces, both American and French, they were there to try and stabilize things.
I guess that makes sense. You need some kind of neutral force to keep the peace.
Yeah, in theory. But their presence actually became a point of contention. Some groups saw them as invaders, as unwanted interference, and that made them targets.
So the peacekeeping forces ended up being caught in the crossfire. Do we know who was behind the bombings?
Unfortunately, no. The perpetrators were never definitively identified.
Man, that's got to be frustrating. no closure, no justice.
It is, and it had a huge impact on the conflict and on peacekeeping efforts in general. The multinational force withdrew from Lebanon after the bombings, and the country became even more unstable.
It's a stark reminder of how fragile peace can be, and how even with the best intentions, sometimes things can go terribly wrong.
Right, and sometimes those good intentions, they can have unintended consequences, and the cost of that is often paid in human lives. All right, ready for our last October 23rd event?
Hit me with it.
This one takes us to Moscow, Russia, October 23rd, 2002. This is a story of terror and desperation. A group of Chechen rebels took over a crowded Moscow theater. They took over 850 people hostage.
Wow. A hostage situation on that scale. That's terrifying. What were the rebels after? What did they want?
The Chechen rebels were fighting for their independence from Russia. Their demand was a full withdrawal of Russian troops from Chechnya.
So they were using the hostages as leverage to try and force Russia's hand.
Exactly. And the whole world was watching, waiting to see what would happen. The situation dragged on for 3 days, with tense negotiations going on the whole time.
I bet. Those must have been some pressure-filled negotiations.
Oh, absolutely. And tragically, they weren't successful. The siege ended when Russian special forces stormed the theater. They used a knockout gas to try and subdue the rebels.
I kind of remember that. Wasn't it a controversial tactic?
It was. It was supposed to incapacitate the rebels without causing any casualties, but things went wrong. A lot of the hostages ended up dying from the effects of the gas.
Man, that's just heartbreaking. A truly desperate situation all around. It seems like no matter what choice was made, there were going to be awful consequences. So 3 very different events, all taking place on October 23rd. Is there a common thread? Is there a bigger story that these events tell us about history?
You know what? I think there is. I think each of these events, in its own way, is about the same thing. The pursuit of power and autonomy.
Interesting. Break that down for me. How do you see that playing out in each of these events?
Well, think about it. You've got the Hungarian people rising up against Soviet control. You've got the various factions in Lebanon all struggling for dominance. And then you have the Chechen rebels taking extreme measures to try and win their independence.
Yeah, okay, I see where you're going with this.
They're all driven by this fundamental human desire, the desire to control your own destiny, to chart your own course, to be free.
That's a really insightful way to connect these seemingly disparate events. It's pretty amazing how focusing on a single date can reveal these larger patterns, these recurring themes in human history. So we've gone from revolution in Budapest to tragedy in Beirut to a hostage crisis in Moscow, all on October 23rd. It makes you wonder what other significant events might have happened on this date throughout history, right?
Absolutely. That's the thing about history. It's full of surprises, and sometimes the most fascinating discoveries are hiding in plain sight, just waiting for someone to dig a little deeper.
You got that right. And who knows, maybe some of our listeners out there will be inspired to do some exploring of their own. Maybe October 23rd has even more stories to tell. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll see you next time, ready to uncover another hidden corner of history.
Until then, keep exploring.